And we're back with more News Talk Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this edition of UFO Friday with our friend Dave Scott, who of course has a terrific show on Saga 960 from 10 p.m. Eastern time to 1 a.m. Eastern, 3 hours of spine-tingling radio that will keep you up at night. All sorts of stories, not only about UFOs, but about things like Sasquatch, Dogman, and all sorts of creatures. Weird and wonderful stuff every night. Well, Mondays through Fridays, right on Saga 960. And now he's got actual news. I mean, he has news anyway, but he's actually had a conversation with a member of parliament, a gentleman who has come out and said, there really is something out there. We should find out what it is. And so Dave got the scoop. He interviewed this individual, and now he's going to tell us about it on this edition of UFO Friday. Welcome once again, Dave.
Mark, it's always a pleasure to be with you on Spaced Out Radio and on Saga 960 and on the Mark Petroni Show. I mean, hey, let's cover the full gamut here because this is what it's all about. You and I, since we started these hits well over a year ago, have been talking about what is going on in Canada regarding UFOs. Well, today, that picture seems to be a lot clearer. The fans on Saga 960 and listeners will be able to hear our interview with Conservative Member of Parliament Larry Maguire later on Monday regarding this highly anticipated interview on what Canada's role is when it comes to the unidentified aerial phenomena. And it's great. It's been phenomenal. I learned a lot of information, and I'll tell you, I mean, it's nice to have the Canadian government start to get into the UFO game.
Yeah, this is a Conservative member of Parliament from Manitoba, an individual that you got to know as somebody who was asking questions, asking the kind of questions that you or I would ask, which is, what's going on? What does the government know about these things? We know they're out there. What do we know? Obviously we don't know a lot, like where they're from, but they're in there. They could possibly be a security threat. We already know that. That's been brought up in the Pentagon hearings. But here it is, right here in Canada. And of course, in Canada, there's no shortage of UFO incidents. There's the Falkland Lake incident that took place back in the 1960s. There's the Shag Harbor incident in Nova Scotia, and these are well documented incidents where it's possible that there was some contact with ETs of some kind. And so good for you and good for Larry Maguire for talking about this sort of thing. Let's hear a little bit of your interview with Larry, shall we?
Before Congress and passed, and we didn't receive a lot. They didn't pass it on to our nuclear safety group, but security commission, I should say. But we got a reply back in writing from the questions that I wrote again to him to make sure, which was a bit innocuous. It didn't have a lot of detail to it. And so I'm still pursuing that. We've got an official party position on this as well, with the objective of identifying origins and intent of UAPs, pardon me. And it based on the fact that our closest ally and NORAD partner continues to investigate the national security implications of a UAP. And so I think it'd be prudent for Canada to take a similar approach. And so rather than just, ridicule and silence on these issues, I think it'd be wise to take this issue seriously with that objective of determining what the origin and intent is and find out what the efforts should be undertaken to investigate and make those findings more public in a responsible manner.
All right. Give me your impression of Larry Maguire and how far he's able to move the needle on this UFO issue.
Well, I will say this. The one thing that I really learned about Larry Maguire and the entire topic regarding Canada is how far behind we are, the United States, within our understanding of what this unidentified aerial phenomena is. We are taking baby steps while the Americans are starting to run with this on a political level. We did talk about the idea of whether or not this was a threat to national security. Maguire is knowledgeable enough to understand that he knows it's not Russia. He knows it's not China. He knows that the technology that he has been told by people like Luis Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Hal Puthoff, members of the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies, which includes 7 different Canadian scientists, that this subject is potentially not of this world. Where is it coming from? Nobody knows. And McGuire was a little bit hesitant to get into that. But what he did say is that more and more members of parliament are starting to take this subject very seriously. We talked about fellow Conservative member Raquel Dancho, also from Manitoba. From Ontario, NDP MP Matthew Green is also taking this very seriously as well. And, you know, there are a number of other people that are talking about this subject. The funny part about it is, Mark, we haven't heard a thing from the sitting Liberal Party. This is cause for concern. We know back in June of 2021 that former Defense Minister Harjit Sajid was read into the UFO story 4 days prior to the Department of the DIA in the United States. Pardon me, the Department of I forget the name right now. I apologize. The DIA in the United States releasing their preliminary report on UAP last year on the 25th of June. We also did get word from Larry McGuire that he had heard, although he could not confirm that Prime Minister Trudeau has been read in, he did confirm that he had heard word that former ambassador to the United States, David McNaughton, had conversations with people in the United States regarding unidentified aerial phenomena in 2019. It is suspected that McNaughton had come in and briefed the Prime Minister and potentially Harjit Sajid on this subject as early as 2019. The Prime Minister's office so far has been absolutely quiet on this. The Liberal Party of Canada really doesn't seem to be interested in talking or moving this subject forward, which is kind of interesting because they are of power. But we do have the NDP, we do have the Conservative Party of Canada, and we do not know yet whether or not the Bloc Québécois will be joining this fight to learn about what's going on in Canadian airspace.
All right. So the Liberal government isn't saying anything. Is it possible that the reason they're not saying anything is that they know something that they simply can't talk about or don't want to talk about? I mean, if they've been read in, as you say, by members of the intelligence community south of the border, it's quite possible that maybe they were told, look, we're going to give you this information, but don't you dare talk about it publicly. Is that possible?
Well, I mean, any type of answer I give for that would be complete speculation at this time. I think, you know, on a personal level, from studying Canadian politics, we have a prime minister that is more about his own agenda rather than discussing an agenda that may have something to do with not only everybody in this country, but everybody around the world. And I don't know why the prime minister and his office is staying closed on this. In the standing committees that many members of the Conservative Party have asked questions about, the members from the Liberal Party really seem to be dumbfounded by the questioning regarding unidentified aerial phenomena, much like they know nothing about the subject. Hence, why would you bring up the topic? They've seemed caught off guard when questioned, whether it's about UFOs hovering over Canadian nuclear energy facilities in Ottawa or what the RCMP knows about UAP studies. One of the things that Larry McGuire stated on our show that I think is imperative for all Canadians to know right now, Mark, is the fact that we have a number of agencies that have been collecting this data for decades, and they have done nothing with it. They haven't put it into separate files, and that doesn't matter whether it's CSIS, whether it's the Department of National Defense, NAV Canada, the RCMP, Transport Canada, or any other alphabet agency that we have up here. The files just seem to go into a drawer and just stay stagnant there, other than ones that NORAD wants to keep top secret. that gets shuffled over there. So what McGuire comes out saying, and he is reminding people that, look, the topic of UAP is not a Conservative Party issue. It's not an NDP issue. It's not a Liberal Party issue. It's not a Bloc Québécois or Green Party issue. This is an issue that is going to affect every single Canadian. It's going to affect every single person on this planet, all 7.8 billion of us. And what McGuire is saying is, look, we need, as a country, to take this a little bit more seriously. We need to get it out of the hands of government, put it into the hands of Canada's top scientists to potentially start our own UAP task force to gather the information to see what is happening in Canadian airspace.
All right. So this guy said he's been looking into it. He says his party has a position on it. Obviously, it's a conservative position. But I mean, he has not been ridiculed. I don't see this guy McGuire being attacked as a nut, as a kook, as a UFO freak or whatever, as Fox Mulder. So, you know, why don't more of them come out? I mean, apart from a handful of MPs, that's it. I realize that there are other priorities in government, but I don't think they have that much to fear as long as they come out and ask intelligent questions about what's going on. What's going on here?
And that's a good question. Okay, there is still a lot of stigma attached to this, although that stigma really seems to be disappearing quickly in Parliament Hill, or on Parliament Hill, pardon me, where a lot of the MPs who are taking a look at this are looking to their counterparts down south and seeing how the Americans are treating this story. That is a good part of this story, is they're saying, look, if our American neighbors and friends are really looking into this seriously, we need to stop with the little green men. We need to stop with the X-Files theme song, and we need to start taking this story maybe a little bit more seriously on how we could potentially protect any Canadian civilians or Canadians at all in this part from what is going on, to teach them. Now, Larry McGuire did say that this isn't a military issue. Okay, we need to find out what's going on. He encourages any current or former military members or RCMP members to reach out to their local members of parliament to say, hey, we need to have a discussion. This is something I witnessed. This is something that I need to talk about for what I saw. Look, in Canada, we don't have the stringent laws that they do in the United States, where if you break an NDA, you're going to jail for life. Your finances are ruined. Your family is ruined. They're not going to have your house or whatever they throw at you. It's not like that up here. It's a little bit more of an open process. Not saying that you can break an NDA or a non-disclosure agreement, but there's less trouble for it because Canada wants to be a little bit more transparent, according to McGuire, on this subject. And this is why he's encouraging people to come out and tell their stories, especially if they were a part of a government agency, of an airline, of the Canadian Armed Forces, or whatever. And that's what we need more of right now. They want evidence. They want people to come out and tell their stories about what they witnessed while on active duty, so that way the rest of Parliament can get their eyes open to this. Look, there's a long way that this subject has to go. They have to garner the support in order to try and get it on the House of Commons floor to make this a topic for debate and discussion. And that is the key goal. Once it gets to debate and discussion, the opposition parties can recommend to the Liberal Party to maybe it's time to set up a UAP task force led by Canada's top scientists in order to see what is going on. The Liberal Party, of course, being in leadership right now, along with their joining with the NDP, okay, this is something where they're going to have to wake up. They are going to have to play ball with this, because if the NDP is already siding with the Conservative Party of Canada on UAP, the Liberals are going to have no choice but to eventually come to the table.
Dave Scott joining us on Saga 960 and on the Mark Petroni Show. We always appreciate Dave coming on the show. He has a terrific show himself from 10 p.m. Eastern Time to 1 a.m. Eastern Time, Spaced Out Radio. And he deals with this stuff 5 days a week, and on weekends too, with his own work, his YouTube channel, and so forth. So I certainly welcome Dave on the show. We get to do this basically once a week, although when a member of parliament is talking, as Larry Maguire is, and obviously that's news. Did Larry tell you whether or not he personally has ever seen anything in the sky that he couldn't identify? Is there a personal experience maybe that he shared with you?
He doesn't have any personal experiences. Okay. He says, there were many a nights when he was, farming the crops in Manitoba as a kid, as an adult, and he would stare up at the stars and, he would see some satellites flying by, but never ever has he had an experience. He started getting introduced to this topic when the 2017 New York Times article came out about unidentified aerial phenomena. This is where he learned the names of Luis Elizondo and Chris Mellon, especially. And it just kind of piqued his interest that he wanted to know more. But more specifically, he wanted to know, as a member of parliament, whether or not this phenomena was happening north of the border. So realistically, he has been quietly investigating this story for the last 4 years. It's only been the last couple of months where we have seen Maguire come out publicly to discuss this phenomena. And the information that he has gained, he has had private meetings with Luis Elizondo, which I will say, for the record, was set up by myself in my conversations with the members of the Conservative Party of Canada and Luis Elizondo. I'm the one who put them together and in contact with each other. Chris Mellon has sat in on conversations with Maguire. He is the former Deputy Secretary of Defense for the United States and Intelligence, and he has sat in on conversations regarding this topic as well. And then most recently, just a few months ago, members of the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies, which included Simon Fraser University professor Paul Kingsbury, who sits on the board of directors for the SCU, they were joined by legendary researcher out of the United States, a gentleman named Hal Puthoff, to have more discussions about not only UFOs, but the consciousness aspect of everything and where they're coming from and where this entire topic is going. And that is what really convinced Maguire that he needs to try and bring this out more publicly, in the sense that this is something that Parliament needs to have a serious discussion about, on whether or not Canadian airspace is A, safe, B, how often this is happening. And we need to be able to deal with our allies and our counterparts on figuring out where this phenomena is coming from.
Dave Scott, Spaced Out Radio, joining us on Saga 960, UFO Friday. That's incredible, and I certainly hope that he's able to push the envelope. And congratulations to you, Dave, in terms of doing what you're doing. You're obviously doing your part in terms of getting this into the public discourse, and just setting the stage, getting the players talking, and working with Elizondo, who's a major player in the UFO field. He's a bit of a shadowy character too. I mean, you always get the sense that he knows more than he is saying, and he's appeared multiple times on Fox. He's spoken to you many times. What do you think Elizondo knows that maybe he hasn't shared yet with everybody?
Good question. I think he knows more about the phenomena than what we can actually comprehend. And Mark, this is somebody that is entirely in the know of what is going on regarding this. There's a reason why Elizondo is working for the United States Space Force and Space Command and detailing his knowledge of the UAP phenomena to them. We recently found that out through his very public lawyer, Daniel Sheehan, who is a UFO activist and, one of the original lawyers on the Watergate trial. I mean, that brought Nixon down back in the 1970s. So, I mean, Elizondo is the face of the franchise when it comes to this entire topic. He's the Connor McDavid or the Wayne Gretzky, however you want to put it, regarding this topic. And, when you get that deep into things, you see things that most human beings cannot, which means that you are in touch, in tune with what's going on. He's seen things, videos from the Air Force. He's seen things from the Navy, private pilots and everything. I mean, this is something that, we need to see more of. And, one of the things that was discussed, with Mr. McGuire in regards to this is, does Canada have that person? And for right now, we can't figure out if we do. Right. And we need to be able to know if we know who is really running it. We know that Christopher Rakowski, a UFO researcher and author out of Manitoba, tends to get a lot of the UFO files from the Canadian Department of National Defense. He's been doing that for the last couple of decades, but we don't know if there's someone hidden within CSIS or one of Canada's alphabet agencies as to whether or not we have our own Luis Elizondo. I have not heard that. Elizondo has not told me. This subject seems to be catching people off guard. So, I mean, trying to keep it Canadian, we are going to be relying on people south of the border like Elizondo, like Mellon, like Hal Puthoff, like members of the SCU to try and bring this more into a Canadian context. And hopefully we can create our own Elizondo that will maybe, just maybe, be allowed through Canadian law to be a little bit more open in their dialogue with what is happening. Because one of the things that McGuire did state to me is the fact that he wants to see full disclosure. Whatever the Canadian government knows about this subject, he feels the public has a right to know. In the U.S., where the military industrial complex is large and in charge, they want to be able to keep their secrets. They want their cake and eat it too. Even though politicians such as Marco Rubio or Kristen Gillibrand or Tim Burchett want to see full disclosure being what happened at Roswell. Do we have crash retrievals? Do we have bodies? Okay. And that also goes to what's going on up here. Canada has a very proud history of ufology dating back to the 1950s, where a gentleman named Wilbert Smith was actually probably the top UFO researcher in North America at that time and was even passing his findings on to the U.S. government. Fast forward to 1967, where we had two major incidents, one in Falcon Lake, Manitoba, okay, Saskatchewan or Manitoba? Falcon Lake. Manitoba.
Falcon Lake is in Manitoba, yeah. It was a Manitoba incident, yeah.
Had a little bit of a brain mess
It happens.
Where a gentleman named Stefan Mikulik was actually injured by a UFO while doing some amateur geology along a riverbank. And then later on in 1967, we had the incident at Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, where a giant UAP allegedly crashed into the harbor, and that sent, there was over 800 witnesses, from civilians to RCMP to Navy, Army, and many others who actually eyewitnessed this crash happen. And the story that goes along with that is there was actually divers who went down into Shag Harbor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, clear your throat there, Dave. I'm going to give you a second. What we're looking at here is a picture from the Falcon Lake incident. This is a story that was published by the state broadcaster, kind of looking back at that incident. The Falcon Lake incident, still one of Canada's best documented UFO case, even 50 years later. And here you see the picture of the man involved that you were referring to earlier, Stefan Mikulik, who came upon an object in the woods and made contact with this thing and suffered burns to his chest. And it happened in Manitoba in the May long weekend of 1967. And to this day, his family continues to talk about it. This may be one of the most incredible instances where somebody actually had physical contact with a UFO, David. And you're absolutely right about Shag Harbor. I've been to Shag Harbor. They celebrate that incident decades later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a tourism attraction now. And you know what the funny part about it is? I would love to see one of these Discovery Channel type documentaries actually take a submarine down there to see if there is any hidden wreckage that could still be found 50 years later. I mean, they
Wouldn't
did it
that
with
be
the
something?
Titanic. They've done it with all sorts of stuff. Why not try it with Shag Harbor? Who's to
Well,
say that there's still
yeah.
pieces down
Well, isn't it possible that they did that already? I mean,
there?
they would have
Absolutely.
they could have sent a sub down there to look around,
Absolutely.
and because this
But
was not just a UAP, this was a submersible, right? An
absolutely.
unidentified
So,
submersible. Like so, this thing was in the under the water for days.
a couple
There,
days.
yeah, and there
There weren't
were
there
foam.
were
There was like a foam that rose to the top of the water that people could see and have access to.
no, what happened was, this is the alleged story, okay, where they originally thought it was an airliner that crashed. And the American Navy from Maine and the Canadian Navy sent ships in there to try and figure out whether or not it was, an airliner that crashed. And once they checked all of the radar operations and were able to account for all civilian aircraft and military aircraft in the area at that time, they realized that it was something different. So the Navy sent their ships over there. Allegedly, they sent divers down to where this crash site had happened. And now this is all rumor and conjecture right now, an anecdotal story. But if we were to believe it, Canadian divers dove into the water and actually eyewitnessed there's two craft down there, one that was being fixed and one that was helping the damaged craft. All right. And they actually allegedly saw beings working on the craft. And then when they went down the next day, which is now day 3 of this, to check out what is going on, both craft were gone.
Wow. Well, that's quite a claim that they actually saw beings working. So there was something wrong with the craft, I guess.
Yeah.
We're supposed to determine that. But I would ask, what took the authorities so long to come out to Nova Scotia? And I mean, the RCMP was certainly involved. I know that. They were there.
Everybody.
Wow.
What took them so long? Probably to get pieces in place. I don't know. I mean, there's still a lot of mystery that goes along with it, correct? So, I mean, you have to play it. You don't have a choice. And until command tells you to go under, that's when you go under.
Fascinating. Wow. All right. So what else have you got coming up on the show? I mean, it's just one great guest after another. Talk about what's on the horizon for Spaced Out Radio.
Well, we're going to be getting into a lot. Like, for instance, tonight on the show, we are going to be very busy with more UFO talk. We are going to be busy coming up here with a lot of UFO assessment. We are going to, the UFO story right now, Mark, is not going away. And I would be very remiss in saying that we need to be able to be the eyes and the ears of the public who wants us to have this conversation, who wants to learn more. And there are not a lot of shows outside of what we do on Saga 960 who are actually talking about this subject on a real, complete journalistic level. Look, we love the woo. We love having fun and sharing the stories, but we also know we owe the Saga 960 listeners a shred of responsibility to cover these subjects on a journalistic level as well. And I think over the next few months, we are going to see more and more stories come out. We're going to try and get more politicians on board to try and speak about this subject in Canada. And we're going to keep our foot on the gas pedal, trying to make it work and make things happen to keep that news coming.
All right, Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show. Always a pleasure. Much appreciated, my friend.
Take care, my friend.
And that is this edition of the Mark Petroni Show. Really appreciate you tuning in. Stay safe, my friends. Be strong. We will get through the challenges that are facing our people. And have a great weekend. So let's do it again soon, shall we? Bye-bye for now.